Life stories are often filled with unexpected twists and profound lessons, teaching us about the complexities of family, ambition, and personal growth. Today, we share the journey of Megan, a woman who spent years seeking her father's approval, only to find herself facing betrayal, loss, and the harsh realities of life. As she uncovers hidden secrets, battles against a brother who inherited it all, and finds the strength to rebuild her own future, Megan discovers the true meaning of strength, forgiveness, and the importance of letting go. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. I've always felt that the world moves around you, quietly shaping your life in ways you never expected. For me, this feeling began the day my father was buried. The weight of his casket seemed almost lighter than the burden of disappointment I carried that day. It wasn't just the grief, it was the heaviness of years spent trying to earn my father's approval. Years I now realized I would never get back. The rain pelted the black umbrellas around me as we lowered him into the ground. But I barely noticed it. My focus was on my brother, Jason. His hand rested on my mother's shoulder. An image that felt so wrong in that moment. His perfectly pressed suit, his calm and collected demeanor, the smug expression that I had come to despise, all of it reminded me of the years he'd spent coasting through life, with everyone else picking up the pieces. The same smugness that he wore like a badge of honor, as if he deserved everything just because of his name. I was the one who had spent months by Dad's side, the one who drove him to chemotherapy appointments, managed his medications, and held his hand during the worst nights. But it was Jason who seemed to inherit everything when Dad passed. I'm Megan, and for 29 years, I tried to earn my father's approval. Yet, it seemed that no matter what I did, nothing was ever good enough. Now, with him gone, I realized the cruel truth. I'd spent all that time fighting for something that was never going to come. It felt like a lifetime of wasted effort, and all I was left with was the suffocating silence of unspoken words. After the service, the lawyer, Logan, called us to the study to read the will. I followed the small procession into the house, each step echoing with the finality of the situation. My heels clicked against the hardwood floors that still smelled like Dad's cigars and leather-bound books. I knew this house as well as I knew my own skin. Yet everything about it now felt foreign. Mom settled into Dad's old armchair while Jason took his place at the desk, acting as though he already owned it. I chose to stand. I didn't belong there anymore. I wanted to say something, to shout, but instead I bit my tongue, keeping the words locked inside. Shall we begin? Logan adjusted his glasses and pulled out the thick envelope, his voice carrying the same clinical detachment it had during the service. Get on with it, Jason said impatiently, checking his watch. I have a business meeting at 4. Mom shot him that adoring look she always did. Always the dedicated one, just like your father. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Dedicated? Jason hadn't visited Dad once during his final months. Not once. I was the one who had been there, doing everything, and yet, it was Jason who got the reward. Logan cleared his throat and began reading. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting. I, Richard West, being of sound mind. The next 10 minutes felt like a blur of legal jargon. But then, the words that changed everything came. To my son, Jason, I leave my entire estate, including the family business, all properties, and financial holdings. The room fell silent. I waited for the part that was supposed to come after. The part where my name was mentioned. But it never came. That was it. I stared at Logan, who looked at me with that same detached expression. That's it? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding strange, distant. There must be more. Logan shook his head. I'm afraid that's all. Miss Megan. Jason stood up, straightening his tie. Well, that's settled then. I'll have my assistant contact you about the paperwork. Mom reached for my hand, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Your father knew what he was doing. Jason has the business experience to handle the estate. I pulled my hand away before she could touch me. Business experience? I scoffed bitterly. He's run every venture he's touched into the ground. Dad knew that. Jason smirked, unfazed. Don't be bitter, little sister. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I turned to Logan. This can't be legal. I want to contest the will. Logan shifted uncomfortably. You can try, but everything appears to be in order. I stormed out of the study. Not before overhearing part of a conversation between Jason and Logan. The Jensen account, Logan was saying, his voice low, but there was something in his tone that made my skin prickle. Jason cut him off sharply. I know how to handle my father's business. The Jensen account. The name echoed in my mind. I didn't know what it was. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I lingered outside the door, straining to hear more, but the conversation ended abruptly. I needed to know what was going on. And I needed to find out now. I pulled out my phone and texted Michael. Need to talk now. It's bad. His response was immediate. Corner booth at Joey's in 20. On my way. Joey's was the same diner we'd been meeting at for years. The cracked leather booths, the flickering neon sign, the coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since morning, it all felt strangely comforting. When Michael walked in, he could tell something was off. They left you nothing? He asked quietly. His voice filled with disbelief. Not even a token inheritance. I replied, grabbing a fry and dunking it in ketchup. That's not even the weird part. I continued, I overheard Logan talking about the Jensen account. And Jason shut him down fast. It was, suspiciously fast. Michael pulled out his phone. As a financial analyst, he had access to information that most people couldn't get. Give me a minute, he said, his eyes scanning the screen. The waitress refilled our coffee cups. She looked at me with sympathy, squeezing my shoulder. You okay, honey? You look like you've been crying. I forced a smile. Just buried my father today. Rita. She smiled softly, her voice kind. This one's on the house. Michael looked up from his phone. I found something, he said, his expression darkening. Jensen Industrial, one of your father's biggest clients. They filed for bankruptcy protection last year. And your father's company was their primary creditor. The blood drained from my face. My father had been carrying their debts. And now Jason was inheriting a massive financial mess. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about a company on the brink of disaster. If Jason didn't handle this right, everything could fall apart. The phone buzzed in my pocket. Mom. I declined the call. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. Michael was right. I needed to focus. Your brother's never contributed a dime to this house. Has he? Michael asked, his voice soft. No, I whispered. I've been the one paying the mortgage. I'm the one who's kept a roof over our heads. I stared into my coffee, my mind racing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about family, and the way we let each other down. The way we allowed ourselves to be blinded by love for someone who didn't deserve it. The weight of the situation continued to press on me as I sat there with Michael, trying to piece together everything I had learned in the last few hours. Jason had inherited not just the family estate and the business, but a ticking time bomb. And I could already see it all unraveling. The Jensen Industrial account, this enormous debt, was only the beginning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the layers of deceit that surrounded everything my father had built. Jason can't handle this, I said softly, almost to myself. He doesn't have the experience. He's a walking disaster. Michael nodded slowly. I can see that, but he's about to learn the hard way. And so are you. What do you mean? I asked, my brow furrowing. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think you're going to end up cleaning up the mess. Again, his words stung, but I knew he was right. Jason had already proven that he wouldn't take responsibility for anything. As much as it pained me to admit it, I had always been the one who took the weight on my shoulders. That's the way it had always been. And now, as the business teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, it seemed that once again, I'd be the one who had to deal with the aftermath. But I wasn't ready to let Jason have it all, especially not after everything he'd put us through. I'm not saving him, I said firmly, my voice catching a little with the rawness of it all. He's going to face the consequences. It's time he did. Michael met my eyes, and for a moment, there was understanding between us. an unspoken acknowledgement that it wasn't just about the business. It was about something much deeper. Something that had festered between me and my family for years. The tension, the unfairness of it all, had been quietly suffocating me for too long. Now, it was time to let go. I spent the rest of the day going over everything I had heard, piecing together the financial puzzle with the help of Michael, who had access to information that I never could have dreamed of. Jensen Industrial's bankruptcy was just the beginning. There were millions at stake, and no one knew better than me that Jason wouldn't be able to handle it. That evening, when I finally left the diner, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my mother. Zane says he'll handle the mortgage this month. Don't worry. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Yeah, right, I muttered under my breath. Jason couldn't even handle a glass of water without spilling it, let alone our mother's mortgage. By the time I arrived home, the sky was dark, and the storm that had been brewing all day had finally settled. I could hear the soft hum of the television in the living room. Mom, as always, was staring at it, glued to the screen, watching the news cycle endlessly. She hadn't even noticed I had walked in. Mom, I said softly, trying to catch her attention. She turned her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting mine. Did you talk to your brother? She asked. Her voice still tinged with the same softness she always used when speaking about Jason. She never wanted to see the truth. Mom, Jason isn't handling anything, I said, my frustration bubbling over. He's just pretending, like he always does. He's lied to you, to all of us. He's run Dad's company into the ground. And now he's about to lose everything. Her face crumpled, the familiar expression of disbelief sweeping over her. She couldn't see it. She never could. The love she had for Jason had always been blinding. I don't want to hear it, she said, her voice shaking. He's doing his best. He's just trying to figure it out. Don't you see, Megan? He's all we have left. I could feel my heart break for her in that moment. She was just as lost as I was, stuck in a cycle of enabling him because of her love for him. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that everything she had ever believed about Jason was wrong. But I couldn't do that. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my coat. I'm going to Michael's, I said. We'll talk about this later. It was hard, leaving her like that, but I couldn't help her if she wouldn't see the truth. And right now, there was only one thing on my mind. Jason was about to face the consequences of his actions. And I was going to make sure of it. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. I barely slept, my mind constantly running through the numbers, the debts, and the endless tasks that were piling up as the family business seemed to collapse around me. But in the chaos, I found a sense of clarity I had never had before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't chasing after my father's approval or trying to win Jason's affection. I was doing what needed to be done. And it felt freeing, even as it drained me. The situation with the company was worse than I could have ever imagined. Every call I made revealed another layer of the disaster Jason had inherited. The debts were staggering, and it was clear that if something wasn't done soon, everything would go under. Yet, Jason seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was just too stubborn to acknowledge the mess he had created. His last message to me had been about the mortgage. But I knew it was a lie. He wasn't handling anything. Mom, of course, didn't see it that way. She still clung to the hope that Jason would somehow pull through. That everything would magically work out. I saw it in her eyes when she called me the night before. Megan, I know you're worried, but Jason's doing his best, she said, her voice soft, as if that alone was enough to make the situation better. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that Jason hadn't even visited Dad once during his final months. That he hadn't shown any responsibility in the last few years. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't about love anymore, it was about the truth. About facing the consequences. But instead, I just said, I know, Mom, I'll talk to you tomorrow. I could feel the tension in the house as I hung up. The weight of the situation was unbearable. Jason was making no attempt to fix things. And now I was stuck with the responsibility of cleaning up his mess. I had a meeting scheduled with Michael the next morning, and I needed to clear my head. Walking into Joey's diner always felt like a small escape, a break from the chaos. The familiar smell of coffee and frying food was strangely comforting. And for a moment, I allowed myself to relax. Michael was already sitting at our usual booth, a pile of documents in front of him. He looked up as I slid into the seat across from him. "You look exhausted," he said with a slight grin. "But I can tell you're ready to take this on." "I have no choice," I replied, my voice heavy. "Jason's too far gone. It's up to me now." Michael's expression softened. "You've been carrying this family for years. I just hope you're not taking on more than you can handle." I didn't have a response to that. There was no easy answer. I couldn't abandon Mom, even though she refused to see the truth. But I also couldn't let Jason destroy everything Dad had built. The guilt of abandoning him, of letting him face the consequences of his own actions, weighed on me. But at the same time, a sense of justice settled in. Jason had never taken responsibility. It was time for him to face the fallout. We went over the company's financials again. The numbers were devastating. The bankruptcy filings, the overdue payments. It was all too much for one person to handle. But I had already made up my mind. I was going to take control of what I could. "I've got a plan," I said after a long pause. "But I need to speak with Jensen Industrial. They're the biggest creditor, and they're about to pull out. I need to know if there's a way to negotiate. If I don't handle this right, it's game over for us." Michael nodded. "I'll make some calls. But be careful, Megan. Jason's too deep in this. He won't go down without a fight." I nodded, my mind already racing. The storm was coming, and I had to prepare for it. I could already see Jason scrambling, desperate to salvage what was left of the business. But I wasn't going to let him drag me down with him. The time for saving him was long gone. Now, it was about saving what was left, and that, I realized, was a legacy that was mine to rebuild. As I stood up to leave, Michael gave me one last look, a mix of concern and admiration. "You've got this," he said. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I wasn't going to back down. The storm was coming, and I was ready to face it. As the days went by, everything began to fall into place. Albeit slowly, the storm had come, and I had weathered it. My brother Jason, caught in the wreckage of his own choices, had finally come face to face with the consequences of his actions. Mom, as always, had struggled to see the truth. But even she had begun to understand. Even if it was too late, I had built something new, something that was mine. Phoenix Consulting was more than just a new business. It was my way of reclaiming my father's legacy. It was my own path, not one dictated by expectation or the ghosts of the past. I couldn't save Jason. I couldn't save Mom from her illusions. But I could save myself. And that, in the end, was the greatest lesson I had learned. Sometimes, to rebuild, you have to let things fall apart. Sometimes, the best way to heal is to stop trying to fix things that are beyond saving. As I sat in my new office, the phone buzzed. It was Logan, my father's lawyer. "Megan," he said, "your father would be proud. The account is yours to use as you see fit." I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my chest. Finally, after all these years of striving for approval, I had the freedom to make my own choices. Life had a way of teaching you things, sometimes in the harshest ways. But I had learned, and I was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for reading. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more life stories and lessons on overcoming life's challenges. Until next time.